You can't preserve what you grow. There's getting to be more and more ways of preserving all the time. And unfortunately, the new ways of preserving are very expensive, but they're pretty cool, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, we'll see if I can figure out how to use that. Yay! Okay. These classes are sponsored by Missouri Valley Master Gardeners, and if you've been coming to the classes all year long, you've had different Master Gardeners from our club that gave you presentations on all kinds of garden-related topics. And of course, we're looking for suggestions for what you would like us to present next year. So if you have any suggestions, let Shan know, or you can let me know, or whatever, and we'll see if we can find somebody who can teach you about that. As far as I know, Yankton is still the only seed library in the state. We've had inquiries from a number of different places, but as far as I know, we're still the only one. So why would you want to preserve? More and more people are taking an interest in preserving for a variety of reasons. If you have a good gardening year, you have way more produce than you know what to do with. And after a while, it's even hard to find people to take the excess. But it does give you that homegrown food all year long, and you can take pride in that. So you can utilize your excess produce in the wintertime when you don't have that really good, tasty, fresh stuff from your garden. A lot of things that is another thing appealing to a lot of people is that you can control what's in your food. I know when I was about 20 years old, I was having so much trouble with allergies. And after doing the allergy tests, two of the things I was not supposed to have was any canned tomato product or any citrus product that was not fresh. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, when the tomatoes go through the canning factory, the moldy ones don't get sorted out. So you are going to get the mold in the food you eat, and mold is one of the things I'm allergic to. And that was the same thing with the oranges. And so if I can all my own tomatoes, those that are moldy never get near, the food that I'm going to be putting into my jars. So, when you think about it, the mold, well, we'll talk about that in a little minute, but how the process works of destroying the bacteria and so on. To me, it's a sense of accomplishment. I grew up in a canning family, and it is just so, when you see your whole counter full of something that you have made, here a thing too. My shirt came from my daughter. It says, I came, I saw, I can. And the back says, wait for it, pink. So if you've ever canned, you know that you are waiting and counting. If you have 7 jars in your canner, you're counting 1. Oh, there's 1 more to go. So it really is a sense of accomplishment and all that beautiful food that you can put on your shelves. So preservation interrupts food decay. I don't know if you can see this chart real well, but it says down here, growth of some molds, yeast, and bacteria is slowed at 32 degrees. So that's freezing. So if you've got something in your freezer, that growth is not going on while it's in the freezer. And so you can keep that from happening. And then in here is the danger zone. That's our, basically room temperature and a little bit warmer. At 212 degrees, the boiling point of water, high acid foods that's high acid foods are fruits, basically, things with a lot of vinegar in them, like pickles, jams and jellies. Those would be high acid foods. And that temperature, along with the acidity, is enough to keep anything from growing when it's sealed up in a jar. But then when you get up to 240 degrees, that's the processing temperature that you're doing in a pressure canner. And for low acid foods, which is vegetables, meats, those kinds of things, they do not have the acid in there that will help control those microorganisms. So because there's a lack of acid, you need the higher temperatures in order to destroy or slow down the growth of those microorganisms in order for your food to be preserved. So heat destroys microorganisms, but it does vary with the amount of acid in the food as to how much heat you need. Vacuum seal prevents contamination. Now you can buy vacuum sealers, and what they do is they will seal a bag and they suck all of the air out of there. Because microorganisms need three things to grow. They need moisture, they need oxygen, and they need warmth. And so that's what we're trying to keep away from them or prevent from happening. Freezing only slows the growth. I mean, it stops it while it's in the freezer. But once this warms up to room temperature, it can start multiplying again. Dehydrating removes the moisture. So that's the one thing that microorganisms need, as well as the other two. Now, when you decide what you're going to use to preserve food with, it depends on your skill, your storage space, and the third thing is equipment. I really, 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 really want a freeze dryer. And my husband says, but where are you going to put it? And that is the point, because they're about the size of a dorm refrigerator. So it's not like something you can just set on your countertop. My daughter came up with a solution for this, but he didn't think that was viable, so we're still debating. But canning, freezing, dehydrating, and freeze drying are the four main methods of food preservation. In the past, salting would have also been one. And when Grandma and Grandpa were living on the farm and they butchered, they would wrap their meat in cheesecloth and put it in a bin of oats. That was a freezer. Because outside, it was well below 32 degrees. And I mean, it was one of these methods. It was freezing. It was just unconventional as we look at it now. Okay, the equipment that's needed, and I didn't want to bring all my big stuff along with me, so you can look at the pictures. A canner, of course, is about this big around, a boiling water bath canner. It's about this tall enough that it will hold quart jars. And the older style looked like that. They were what they called graniteware, blue with white speckles on them. And most of the time, the bottom had ridges in it, which definitely would not work on a glass top stove. There are new canners now which are stainless steel and absolutely flat bottomed. So I think that they developed them because of the new stovetops. The pressure canner up here on the right is a real heavy piece of equipment. It has a gauge on the top, and it has a petcock, which I didn't want to take a chance on losing, so I didn't bring it. But it fits over this little post, and it has a screw in the top that you can unscrew to let air escape before you actually seal it for pressure canning. It also has these indentations which fit over the canner itself, and then you turn this to get a tight seal. And it has a gasket on the inside to make sure that the seal is tight. Now, I'm not sure where you can get the pressure checked now. You used to be able to go to the extension office and have that done. I'm not sure if they still do that or not. But that's if you have a gauge like this, you want to know that the pressure on here is accurate. And then this gasket can wear out. It becomes crazed and cracked. And so you need to check that too. And you can still get these gaskets. I know I've seen them hanging in Ace Hardware when canning season is here. So I'll talk a little bit more about that with the pressure canning. Dehydrator, this is a fairly small sized one. It's not even as big around as that lid. And it has a number of shelves in it, and this would fit on your countertop. And that is to remove the moisture from your food. And then this is what a freeze dryer looks like. So what else do you need? Well, there's a lot of things you can get by without. In fact, if you want to can pints of things, you don't need to have a water bath canner. If you have like a stock pot, you can use that as long as it's deep enough to cover your jars. And a water bath canner has a rack in it because you don't want the jars touching the bottom of the pot. You're taking a chance on breakage. So what you can do is you can use a trivet in there, or you can just throw a towel in the bottom so that it's not in contact with the canner itself. Now, a pressure canner, if you're going to can non-acid things, you have got to have a pressure canner. But if you watch farm sales or even secondhand stores, sometimes you can find them. My father-in-law got this canner for me shortly after we were married. We think it was probably made in the 1940s. And I mean, they last forever as long as you check gaskets and the pressure gauge on there. Let's see. Oh, other things, you definitely need jars with rings and lids. And these are standard jars. Standard jars will have a name on them somewhere, like Anchor, Ball, Curve. And that means the glass is tempered and it's not likely to break. Before you use the jars, you need to feel to make sure there are no chips. Canning is work. Even though I think it's fun, it's still work. And after you go through all the work, you don't want your jar not to seal because it had a little chip at the top. Although you can take that jar, put it in your refrigerator and use it right away as long as it's only one jar, not the whole batch. For freezing, these are freezer containers that you can buy, and they seal up tight. You can also use freezer bags. Now, mine's been used before, but either the kind that zip or the kind that have the little zip that you have to pull shut. These are heavier plastic than like what your storage bags are. So if you're going to freeze, you should use the freezer bags. I freeze things in these are peanut butter jars. And as long as your jar has a sealing, it's like a piece of plastic in there, and you're going to freeze, these work good for freezing. I have recipes for cucumber salad that is frozen. And in the wintertime, it's just like having fresh cucumber salad. And I also have a recipe for coleslaw with the oil and vinegar kind that's frozen. And it's the same thing. It's just like having fresh coleslaw. So I use a lot of these in my freezer for those kinds of things.
I've used those for canning.
You
you
can
have enough
reuse for canning a couple of times. And yes, and I use those jelly jars that jelly comes in from the store for jams and jellies. I don't use non-standard things for any canning if I have to buy the food. I'm thinking like peaches. You know, I buy a crate of peaches and I'm paying $30-some for that crate of peaches. I want to make sure that what I'm using for canning is something that's standard, that is going to seal and stay sealed. So but like using my own grapes, I canned 50-some quarts of grape juice this year and 30-some pints of grape jelly. Well, but the grape jelly is for the birds, not for me. But anyway, I use those because that's my grapes. And I didn't buy them, even though the water cost me something, but, so I'm not as concerned if they don't seal and stay sealed. Okay, back to equipment. For some of your food, you need to blanch it, like if you're doing tomatoes, you know, you have to put them in hot water, then dip them out, put them in cold water so you can handle. This is fantastic.
Where'd you get it?
I don't remember where I got any of this stuff.
It's my favorite store.
It may have been at Ideal Hardware in Sioux Falls. It may have been. I'm not sure. But it's just full of holes, and so you dip that tomato out and all the water's gone.
I used my thing that came with my Fried Daddy years ago. That just
Yeah,
looks really good.
Similar like that too, yeah. I didn't ever think I needed one of these because I would, you know, like tomato sauce or anything like that, I dip it out with a measuring cup and pour it in. And then I got this, and it is cheap. And I know Menards has these. It's cheap, and it really keeps the tops of your jars from getting messy when you're putting your food into them. Like salsa or tomato sauce or
Jelly.
yeah, jelly, anything like that. So I really, really like that. But again, you can get by without that. You can get by without this. Like you said, you know, use something that you got that the water will drain out of, even a slotted spoon. I don't know how I would get my jars out without one of
You guys have
these.
those.
So I think this probably would be on the required list. And this, yes.
That is also good for like when you're, you know, the handles that you're, on your, what do you call it? The thing, on like the basket. Yeah, because you pull those two handles in, and I use that to pull the handles out and put them up on the edge of the can.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah, because that, otherwise you're in the water.
And it works good for like if you're cooking corn on the cob, you can take. Use it more. I've never used it for that. That's a good idea. It serves two purposes. One is to remove air bubbles. So when you've got your jar full of food, you could just go down the sides and get any air bubbles out that might be in there. Because what happens if you've got air bubbles in there, then after it's canned and the air has come out, then your liquid is below your fruit. So you do want to get the air bubbles out. And this little zigzaggy stair step thing here is your measuring guide for your headspace. So if your recipe says 1/4 inch, you use that. If it's a 1/2 inch, you go to the next one, and so on. So it's just a guide. If you've done a lot of canning, you don't need that guide. You can picture 1/4 and a 1/2 and whatever. It's like when I'm sewing, I know exactly what 5/8 inches. Okay, I think that's my equipment. We'll talk about some of these other things as we go. So when you're canning, for high acid foods, you will process in the water bath. And It's used for fruits, jams, jellies, and pickles, tomatoes. Nowadays, the varieties of tomatoes have less acid than the old heirloom tomatoes did because people did not like as much acid, and so they have been bred to actually have less acid in the fresh tomatoes now. So if you want to can tomatoes in the water bath, you could add a 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid, which you could get with the canning supplies. Or you can use 1 tablespoon of bottled lemon juice per pint of food. And the reason they recommend bottled is because the acidity of the bottled lemon juice is consistent. If you're using fresh lemons, sometimes they're more acidic than other times. And so that's why bottled is recommended. For low acid, you want to use the pressure canner. And you can buy pH paper that you just stick into your food and it will change color and tell you what the pH of your food is, but it's easier to just go with, if it's high acid, you can water bath. If it's low acid, then you need to pressure can. And this is for meats, vegetables, and things with mixed ingredients. So even though your tomatoes for your salsa might be high acid, your peppers are not, your onions are not, you know, those other vegetables that you mix in there with it are low acid. And so,
Can you just add citric acid to that? 'Cause I have never pressure canned my salsa.
no,
No?
that's not enough acidity to bring it up.
Well, does it calls for vinegar? That's not enough either?
It does have vinegar. If you want to do that, I would get some pH paper and check it.
Yeah. I've
Yes.
never-
I can't seem to find any local, maybe I have looked in the wrong place, but has anybody found any of the acid paper of less than 4.5 or 4 pH? Has anybody found it locally?
Amazon.
That's what I figured.
Locally, it's hard to find
It
stuff.
is.
Yeah. And it's better now that more people are doing home food preservation as far as all of this
Yeah.
stuff, but. Instant pots are not recommended for pressure canning, even though they are a pressure device, because the pressure is not consistent from the beginning to the end of your processing time. Okay, for processing, it's a little bit different. In a boiling water bath, you have, now it says place jars in the canner and cover with hot water. I have hot water already in my pressure canner or in my boiling water bath canner.
Because you sterilized your jars.
Right, well, and it's hard to estimate, is this going to be too much or is this going to be too little water? You know, that water displacement, when you put the jars in, the water level rises. But what you can do is have some other water boiling in case you need to add more when you put the jars in. Then you bring it to a boil. And you don't want a full rolling boil the whole time that you're processing. You want a low boil. So where you've got bubbles coming, but not, you know, continuously rolling. Process for the indicated time. How do you know what that is? Well, there are I think on my sheet, I have some online resources on the food preservation one. I recommend the Ball Blue Book. These are tested and they come out with a new one about every 2-3 years, which isn't necessary to have a new one every 2 to 3 years. But they've got charts in here, or you can look, and here it says tomatoes, process, pints or quart jars, 1 hour and 25 minutes, turn off the heat, remove the cover, and it tells you the processing time. For boiling water bath, the temperature obviously is 212 degrees, it's boiling. But the time is going to vary from food to food and by how big your jars are. Then you remove the canner from the heat. Now, that's heavy, but you can pick it up and just take it off the heat and let it set for 5 minutes and then remove the jars. And put the jars on a rack, on a towel, on layers of newspaper, something so they're not direct contact with the countertop. And then you wait for the pings.
Why 5 minutes?
It just cools it down just a little bit. I mean, nothing's, yeah, there's less danger of it boiling out when you remove the jars. Pressure canning, you want 2 inches of water in the bottom of your canner. And then you're going to put the jar in the canner and lock that lid. Now, that petcock on top is going to be open to begin with. And once the steam starts shooting out of the petcock, then you vent that for 10 minutes. So just let that steam come out. You're trying to get the air out of the canner so that you can build up pressure. And then process for the recommended time. Again, this is going to tell you like 10 pounds of pressure for 20 minutes. It's going to tell you in these books, or you can look it up in one of those extension sites or a ball site online, and it will give you that good information. Don't just use .com. Go to either an extension site or the Ball Canning Company site to get good information. It is important to keep your gauge steady while you're processing it. And so, you know, the first time I pressure can every year, I forget, okay, what number did I have the stove set on to keep the pressure level? And so that first time I'm fiddling around with the temperature gauge on the stove to get it to stay consistently like at 15 pounds pressure. After that first time, I know, okay, I gotta have it on 5.5 and then it'll stay. If it gets too high, like electric stoves, you know, the burners keep their heat. On a gas stove, you can turn it up and down and it's instantaneous. So if it gets too high, I just pick up the canner, move it to the burner beside it until it cools back down to the correct temperature, and then put it back on the heat. Yeah, I'm a farm girl. Yeah.
What is our elevation here? Do you know?
Yes, I do know, and I'll tell you that in a little bit. I don't remember it, but I've got it written down.
Thank you.
Okay, then remove the whole canner from the heat. Again, pick it up, move it to the next burner, and let that cool until your pressure gauge is 0. Because you don't want to try to open this up and the whole thing blows up.
And I even wait like 10 minutes after it's 0.
And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Yeah. And then open it carefully. Okay, when you open it, you're going to twist it open and then you're turn this lid away from you, because where's the steam going to be? Here. And you want to direct it away from your face. Okay, then you cool your jars exactly like you did before. Take them out, put them on a rack, on a towel or something like that, and wait for the pings. Glass surface stoves require flat bottom equipment. And one thing is, it may be hard on the surface of your glass top stove. You've got heat in an area that big, for one thing, you know, as big as the pot is. And also when you're doing all this lifting and moving and, you know, there is a possibility of scratching the glass. If you're canning fruit, you'll need to make a syrup and have that ready prior to starting to can your fruit. And again, this is nice because you can control how much sugar is in it. So the heavier the syrup, the more firm the fruit will be. And you know, like if you use a heavy syrup, you're gonna get a really nice firm fruit that absolutely holds its shape when you take it out of the jar. A lighter syrup, less sugar, it doesn't keep the shape of the fruit as well, but you're not consuming as much sugar either. Now, the type of syrup is based on the sugar to water ratio, and I think I have a chart on that in the food preservation canning handout. From light, about 1 part sugar to 3 parts water, to heavy is 1 to 1. So a cup of sugar to a cup of water. That's a lot of sugar. Okay, keep the syrup hot or warm until needed. A quart jar will require 1 to 1.5 cups syrup. If you're trying to figure out how much to make for what you're going to can. And then you can add a teaspoon of ascorbic acid if you want to keep the color. And it adds a little vitamin C. It's not necessary, but it does help keep the color of the fruit. And there's your pretty peaches. Pickling. Okay, we're still on boiling water bath now. So processing fruit, boiling water bath, pickling, boiling water bath because they're high in acid. Use canning salt, canning and pickling. Iodized salt that you might use on your table, iodine makes the color of the pickles darker. And table salt has things added to it to keep it from caking. And they may make your brine in the pickles cloudy. So that's why you want to use, I use canning and pickling salt for all of my canning. Even, you know, the teaspoon that I add to the quart of tomatoes. Vinegar needs to be at least 5% acidity, so check the label on that. It does not matter if you use white or cider vinegar. It'll depend on what you like for flavor. So in my asparagus pickles, I use white vinegar, but in my cucumber pickles, I use cider vinegar. Now the processing time is a little bit different for pickles. So remember when you're processing like fruit, you bring it to a boil and you start processing time. With pickles, you want the water to be boiling. You put the pickles into the boiling water and start processing time immediately. You don't want soft pickles. So, and they do have all that acid added to them. Jams and jellies. I make all my jelly with my own fruit. And so I'm not concerned, you know, the box will say you need 5 pounds of fruit for this batch of jelly. If you want fair quality, I was a 4-H'er. If you want fair quality jelly, you want it so that you hold it up to the light and it shines right through it. No cloudiness. And you may need more fruit than the recipe calls for because it doesn't always make as much juice as you need without squeezing it. And then now for my birds, I don't care. They can have it cloudy. Jam is crushed fruit and preserves our whole fruit or uniform pieces of fruit. Follow the instructions in the pectin package. And you can, this Sure-Gel is a powdered pectin and Certo is a liquid pectin. And their instructions are just the reverse of each other as to when you add the pectin and when you add the sugar. So make sure that you always read your instructions, just so you don't get it turned around. You can also get pectin for low sugar jams and jellies. I know Sure-Gel, there's a pink box instead of a yellow box. That's for low sugar. And to get your jellies to gel, the recipe that's in that box is based on your sugar to pectin to acid proportions. And so that's why you follow the recipe that the box provides you.
Does anybody make any sugar-free jellies or jams?
Here,
Okay.
Oh, yeah, without pectin.
if you're not using pectin, then you're not as concerned about those proportions. And so here's that elevation. Okay, Yankton is 1,200 feet.
I thought it was like 12 or 15.
And temperature test at sea level is for 220 degrees. And then, so this is if you're boiling down your fruit juice and you keep taking the temperature with a good thermometer, and it should gel at about 218 degrees here. For a freezer test, you remove the jelly from the heat, put a small amount on a plate, set it in the freezer for a few minutes and see if it gels. Then you can jar it. Or the sheet test, dip a cool spoon into jelly. If these 2 drops come together and form a sheet, then it will gel. So that's how you can do this without Sure-Jell. Freezing fruits or freezing anything, it has a flavor that is closer to fresh. It has a different texture than canned. Canned is always softer. And the difficulty with freezing is you have to have a freezer. So if all you have is the freezing compartment in your refrigerator, you may not have very much room to freeze and store foods. There are different ways you can do this too. Dry pack, clean your food, and this works great for berries. And you can put the whole berries right on a baking sheet, freeze them until they're solid, and then put them into a freezer bag or a storage container, and they don't clump together. You can take, 3 or 4 out if you want them on your oatmeal. Sugar pack is 1 part sugar to 4 parts fruit. You stir it together until the sugar is dissolved, and then you put it into containers. And this works great for strawberries and sliced peaches, things like that. The syrup pack is use medium or heavy chilled syrup and cover the fruit in the container with the syrup. Now, I have frozen cantaloupe that way. I made balls out of the cantaloupe and put the syrup on it. And, if you were eating fresh cantaloupe, that frozen cantaloupe wouldn't be all that good. But in the winter, it tastes pretty good. Freezing vegetables, they need to be blanched, and that's to stop the action of the enzymes. And those are the things that cause your food to ripen and to continue beyond ripe to rotten. So we want to stop that. And also, it can have an off flavor if you don't blanch it. And blanching is just a process of heating and then cooling. So add the prepared vegetables to boiling water. How long? Look for your chart, it will tell you. Now, I like making my own California mix. And so the broccoli and the cauliflower require 3 minutes of blanching, but the carrots require 2. So I don't want all these pots and pans all over my kitchen. So I have my big stock pot with boiling water in it. I dump the broccoli and cauliflower in, set the timer for 2 minutes, and then I add my carrots and I start with the broccoli and cauliflower, set it for 2 minutes, and then add my carrots, I set it for 3 minutes and add my carrots after 1 minute. There we go. 3 minutes and then 2 minutes. And your chilling time Drain it after it's blanched, the required amount of time, put it in a, colander or something, drain it, get that hot water off of there. And then put it into ice water. And you should chill it for at least the length of time that you blanched it. And it should be thoroughly cool all the way through. And then drain it well and pack it into containers. And that's all you need to do.
Why do you need to cool it?
To stop the cooking action. Dehydrating. This is your countertop dehydrator. No matter what kind of dehydrator you have, follow the instructions. And if you can't find the instructions, try looking online. Put in the model number and the brand name of your dehydrator and instruction booklet. It might be there. My dehydrator is an 8-rack. This is the size of the rack. The dehydrator is about the size of a microwave oven. And I have been dehydrating now this fall. These snap out, these little plastic mesh things. They snap out, you can wash them right in the sink. I don't have a dishwasher, so I don't know if you can wash them in the dishwasher. But, and then you put them back in and they're ready for the next thing that you dehydrate or the next year or whatever the case may be. You can also, if you like fruit roll-ups, there's real heavy plastic that you can get to put over these. And then you cook up the fruit and make it like applesauce, no matter what fruit it is. You spread a thin layer on here and then put these in your dehydrator. And then you can roll it right up with the plastic that's on there, just so it doesn't all stick together. Let me show you a couple of things that I have dehydrated. This is my parsley. I packed an ice cream bucket full of parsley from the garden and washed it good and clipped all the stems off and then laid it out. Now the parsley kind of sticks up, so I was only able to do 4 racks at a time, leaving a space in between. One ice cream bucket full got me 3 jars like this.
Wow.
Now, these, when you use it, you're supposed to put it in your hand and rub it and crush it. And my home dried, I can't crush it very well. This is a coffee grinder. I had one coffee grinder that I used for everything and brushed out, cleaned out really well. And then I decided I'd buy another coffee grinder. So I have one for coffee and one for herbs. But this is what it looks like after you go through the coffee grinder. So just on and off. Don't put it on, don't push it down and leave it or you'll get powder. But these are my parsley, and I have used some of this. So, I mean, this, when you put it through the coffee grinder, it maybe will be half as much as this full jar. I made my own paprika last year. I have paprika peppers. And so you can either dry them whole, but it takes days. Or you can, and then when they're dry, you take the seeds out and everything and break them up and put them in your coffee grinder. And you can do that, you can make your own chili powder with chili peppers, which I've had a ton of chili peppers this year, but I haven't done that yet. On your drying guide, I have some recipes there, and this is sage and rosemary salt. So this one is actually dried in the oven instead of dehydrated, but and it's mixed with salt. So you can rub it over your meat, use it as a rub. All kinds of fun things you can do. These are the apples I just finished drying. So this is 4 trays full of apples. It's about 1 ice cream bucket full of apples.
Do you always peel yours? I don't peel
Yes.
mine.
I do peel mine. And you don't need to. I just do it because the peelings and the flesh don't dry it exactly the same way, so.
Do you ever use ascorbic acid on your dried stuff like that?
Yes, I'll talk about that in a minute. I always do. On the fruit, yes. Okay. Now, oven drying can be done, but it is lengthy and you have to have your oven temperature really low because you don't want it to bake or roast or burn. And sun drying is not recommended for South Dakota because of our humidity here. So you can sun dry some things like herbs, but for things that have a lot of liquid in them, like tomatoes or apples or something like that, probably not. One thing you want to try to do is cut your food in uniform sized pieces so that it all dries at the same rate. And for fruits, I do this. Soak in a mixture of 1 tablespoon of citric acid, 1 tablespoon of ascorbic acid in a gallon of water for 2 minutes. And then I dip it out, and on my table, I have towels laid out. And I have my trays on top of the towels, and I arrange all my fruit on the trays, and that the towels underneath will absorb that extra liquid before I put it into the dehydrator. Vegetables work great to dehydrate. Things like onions and leeks, which I do dehydrate both. You do not want to do that in your house if you can avoid it. The first time I tried that, I tried it with onions, and every towel in the house smelled like onions. So I have a garden shed with electricity in it, so now I dry those kinds of things in the garden shed.
And onions take forever to dry.
Yes,
There's so much moisture.
they do. Well, the more moisture it is, the longer it takes to dry.
You cut your onions up or you just do slices?
I run them through the food processor, so they're thin little pieces, and then I spread them out on the tray. And then in order to get them in smaller pieces, now if I wanted to throw those in soup or something, you could just leave them like that. But what I do is I have a big dish pan, and I put all my dried onions in there, and then I get in there with my hands and just break them all up into smaller pieces. And then you want to store them in jars, freezer bags, containers, or Ziploc containers. And over time, if you don't eat them right away, like I have some leeks, I should have brought them to show you how bad they get. But I have some leeks that I didn't get used, and they're a couple of years old, and they're brown, completely brown. And they do absorb just a little bit of moisture. So these are crispy, but if you just let them stay in that and don't eat them up, they will reabsorb some moisture. It's okay to put these little desiccant packets in there too. If you want to keep them drier. Okay.
Do you ever put oxygen absorbers in your dehydrated
Yes,
product?
yes, that's what this is.
Oxygen absorber, that's moisture absorber, isn't it?
Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be interesting.
Yeah, this one is for humidity. I do have some that are for oxygen too.
Yeah.
These are both for humidity.
Okay.
And you can buy them on Amazon too, I know you
Yeah.
can.
Gotcha.
Okay, dehydrating herbs, there are several different methods you can use for that, and you don't need a dehydrator, but it does take a long time without one. This is thyme that I picked last week, and you want to hang it in warm, not sunlight, darker place. And this still is, I got straw in here. This is still not drying. It's still pliable, like fresh time. After a week, after a week. So it takes 2 to 4 weeks, if not longer, yeah.
You can put them in, I do brown paper bags and put them in there and then just ask them and I hang them in the garage and sometimes I forget about
Just
them.
ignore them and they'll be dry when you're ready, yeah. You can rack dry, which is just like a screen, which I also use for seed saving, but I have done that with parsley before I thought of doing it in the dehydrator. And it took longer than 7 to 10 days for parsley. I think it took almost a month till the parsley was dry on a screen like this. And then in the dehydrator, 8 to 12 hours. And again, this is at a lower temperature than you dehydrate other stuff. Like my fruit is about 135 degrees and herbs are a lower temperature. And then again, store in an airtight container in a cool, dry place.
What's the difference between freeze dried and dehydrated?
We're getting to that.
Oh,
right?
okay. There we go. I didn't.
Freeze drying. This requires specialized equipment. And freeze drying has been around since World War II. It started being used commercially in about the 1950s. And that's for things like the strawberries in your cereal. And you can buy little packets of freeze-dried food. It's not inexpensive. But it's only been in the last 5 years that freeze dryers were available for the general public. And for the first time this year, I saw them here in Yankton. So at Bungar's and I think at Ace as well, they both had freeze dryers. You can get them in 3 different sizes, and I'm not sure which size they have there. Based on the price, as I was looking it up, I think maybe it was a medium-sized one, which is about the size of a dorm refrigerator.
How much were they?
Almost $3,000.
Oh, ouch.
So you want to freeze dry a lot if you buy one.
Can you freeze dry? You just got in?
Yes.
You can.
Except that's.
That's a really scary.
Yeah. Okay. So this is an investment, and as my husband keeps pointing out, you need a place to put this thing. And he thinks I have way too many small appliances and other kinds of things already. So how does it work? It works by freezing the food first, then it reduces the pressure, and that turns any liquid in there into a vapor. Just like in the wintertime, you know, you have snow and all of a sudden it's just gone. It turned into a gas.
It freezes first though.
It freezes first.
Oh, wow.
And 10 pounds of apples will reduce to about a pound of freeze-dried food.
Wow.
So it really reduces, I mean, it would be a great way to get rid of. Is that why you got one? Because you had all those apples?
It's part of the reason. You use it a lot, all the time, it hardly ever stops. Really?
Yeah.
Can you do potatoes?
You can do anything, including like yogurt. Yogurt drops are supposed to be really good freeze-dried. You just plop little pieces of yogurt on your trays
Yes.
and it's like candy.
Well, that's what we use when I cut Theo's hair. I get a bag of them and that's why we sit still for haircuts.
Yeah.
I don't have a dehydrator.
Well, maybe you need to get one.
Yeah. Tell my family, this, the next 5 years, this is my gift.
And then they'll say, and where are you going to put it?
I got a spot.
Okay.
I'm on my first shelf.
Home freeze dried is about 1/3 the cost of store freeze dried, but it does take about $2 worth of energy every time you freeze dry a dryer full of food. Foods traditionally cooked for eating should be cooked before freeze drying. You can like freeze dry all the vegetables that you want to put into your vegetable soup. And you can see the difference there
Oh, yeah.
between dehydrated and freeze dried. The dehydrated kind of loses some of its color, loses some of its shape, and the freeze dried does not. It looks just like the food.
How about nutrition wise, the difference?
Nutrition wise, this, you lose almost no nutrition by freeze drying. And you eliminate about 98% of the moisture. So they're crunchy, when they're freeze dried. The preferred storage container, unless you're going to use it fast, these are my seed saving Mylar bags, but you'd want bigger ones if you were storing freeze dried food in there. But the Mylar bags with the zip seal at the top, and you can get those on Amazon too. You can get them in all kinds of sizes. I personally like the ones with windows in the front better than these, so you can see what's in there. But you could just label it. And then these little packets, you need the oxygen absorbing ones.
For your seeds?
No,
For your freeze dried.
freeze dried, you need the oxygen absorbing.
What about vacuum sealing it?
I think you would turn it into a powder. Because they're so
The
crunchy.
oxygen absorbers suck out all the air, so that it basically looks like a freeze-dried package.
Yeah,
Not always.
Not always,
Not
but
always,
most of the time.
Yeah, because I've been putting a lot of stuff in my other bags.
and Mary said that you can freeze dry eggs, and then you just use equal parts of egg powder and water, and they're like, you
Yeah,
have.
we have a lot of eggs right now too. Really?
Now, maybe I could convince my husband of that, because we have chickens, and we always have more eggs than we know what to do with. Maybe some eggs for some freeze dry.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's it. You just gotta go together as a group.
Yeah, that's right.
Amazing.
Okay, resources, I recommend anything by Ball. And the Ball books I've got here outside of the blue book just basically have recipes in them more than anything. And I know they've got at least one of those here at the library. And then e-resources, I think I have some of those on your food preservation sheet. But the key to finding a good, reliable, research-based resource, anything published by Extension. And so if you want to know about freeze drying, Google freeze drying extension. And it will come back with all these university extension sources that you know are good researched information. So on any topic, and it doesn't have to be food preservation topic, it could be anything. It could be growing peppers extension, and it will take you to an extension site that has good, reliable information. And notice, everything on here is an extension site except for the Ball. So that's the way I do my research. Oh, I did forget, there are things that could be preserved in a variety of ways. Like you could cut this, bake this, you could can it.
Is that an acorn squash?
It is a special kind of acorn squash, and I can't remember. I like it better than the green ones. I have, when we built our house, we built a cellar in it, in the basement, that is insulated and not heated. And so it's probably 50 degrees in there in the wintertime. And so I can keep, like I keep my sweet potatoes in there. I keep these in my garage, which is also insulated, and that gets down into the 40s and upper 30s sometimes in there, even though it's insulated.
You don't heat it at all?
Nope. My squash, usually, if I still have squash left, will start spoiling about March.
Wow.
So that's how I keep all my squash. And I have kept my potatoes in the garage.
You don't put them in your cave black room?
No, I don't. I don't have enough room.
If you don't heat your garage, it's insulated, because ours is too.
Uh-huh.
Can you keep plants from outside in there? Does it get too cold?
Well, watch the temperature. You know, when it gets really cold in the wintertime, we put a thermometer out there. And if it starts getting into the 30s, we put a little space heater in there with it. But yeah, just watch the temperature.
And do you do apples that way too?
My apples, I keep them, we have a
In your cellar.
refrigerator out in the shop that is just a refrigerator. It doesn't have a freezer. And so I keep my apples in the refrigerator. Apples you can't store with a lot of other things because they give off ethylene gas and the other things won't keep as well. And we have a well pit. It's a concrete lined hole in the ground that you could go into for a tornado. But that's where we keep our potatoes. So,
Wow.
Wow.
You need to have a tour of your place.
Yeah.
Freeze dryer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions?
When do you have time to do it all?
I'm retired. You find time to do what you like to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do I get a new sewing machine or?
Well, you're up here 10 years now, you know, if you're gonna have a gift, you're probably for both 10 years out.
She has a question.
Do
Yes.
you ever use your your food saver with the lid, you know, with the,
No, I
oh,
haven't.
wonderfully.
Really?
Yes, that's what I do. I suck out the air out of my jars with my dehydrated product in it. I put a oxygen absorber in it. Here, I might start using it. I haven't. I'm kind of new to this area. I might start using the moisture one, but I have always just put a food oxygen grade inside of it, and then I use the little cap and suck out all the air in the jar, and it works beautifully.
I'll bet it
Works much
does.
better than leaving it in a
Yeah.
bag. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I have a spray, one of those bags.
Yeah, it works great. I use it for vegetables.
I always wondered what that other thing in there was for.
Wonderful.
How do you work a jar?
Well, you just take and put the flat jar top on it, and then you put this little cap over it, and you hit vacuum with this food saver. You'll have a little port, and you hook the tube up to that port, and then it's on the top of the plastic part that you put over the lid, and you hit the button and it'll suck the air out of it. And then you take that little plastic lid off of it and you can pick up the jar. But yeah, but I also put the oxygen absorber in it before I do all that. It works great.
Oh, I'll have to try that. That'd
And
work good with your freeze dryer.
And it keeps a lot
That's
longer.
what I do with it.
And then I keep it in a dark, cool place.
Yes.
And I've got stuff that's 2 years old that looks, it's just great.
I'll have to try that because, yeah, I hate to throw my leaks away. But now I have new leaks.
Yeah, well, try it because you'll be impressed.
I will do that.
That's my secret.
Any other questions? You want to talk about freeze drying, you talk to Mary.
You know, Jan had mentioned to me, because I had called the company, you know, I
she looked at getting some of them. And she said to get the one that's not oil. Yours is with oil, right?
Oh, the pumps?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know if they've had some issues with it.
If you read what people say, there could be a problem with the oil system, so you want the brand that doesn't flow a sealed motor system.
There's
Is what-
two different kinds of pumps. There's an oilless one and.
Yeah, you want an oilless one.
But I haven't had any problems.
Good, I'm glad you have it.
But they also have updated them in the last few years.
I bet you they have.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, if you wait a couple more
Yeah.
years, the price will probably come down.
Well, I don't know if the price will come down, but
Not
when we
anymore.
watched videos on the older ones that people are using, it has taken out longer than the newer ones do. But they say, I haven't actually figured out here, but a lot of places where you watch, they have little monitors where they know how many kilowatts it uses or whatever, and it's less than $2 a batch. And I'm thinking, well, you use probably that much when you're canning.
Oh, yeah, you use a lot of electricity for canning. And freezing, you're using electricity to keep it
Yeah.
frozen the whole time.
So that way I don't think it's very, it doesn't cost you much. It's funny.
Okay.
Good job, thank you.
So this is the last one, right?
This is the last one for this year,
And
yeah.
then it starts up again.
February, March, I don't know, sometime late next year.
Because this was like to,
It seems funny. Library. And I don't know what time it closes now, maybe 8 because of school.
Yeah.
Someone has mentioned.
Oh, yeah. No, my mother had a horrible accident. And it exploded all over her. I'm terrified.
Certainly, you're.
I love the great.
I